it's either something or it's nothing. If it's embraced as an institutional asset, if it's legitimized as an asset, then it's not going to zero. And if it's not going to zero, it's going to a million. And I think the short answer to your question is education. And with education comes adoption. And at this point, you just have 95% of the world that still doesn't quite understand what it is. And that means
In this video, Michael Saylor breaks down why right now might be your last chance to jump into Bitcoin before it's too late. Bitcoin has been on an incredible bull run over the past couple of months, especially after Trump's election win, where it skyrocketed to an unbelievable $100,000 per Bitcoin. If you're not familiar, Michael Saylor is the CEO of MicroStrategy, a company that's been buying up Bitcoin like there's literally no tomorrow. Clearly, he knows something we don't, so let's dive in and see where he thinks Bitcoin is headed in the next 10 to 20 years and why he believes now is the best time to buy.
but my forecast is Bitcoin, in essence, it's growing 60% a year for quite a while now. And I'm forecasting it will decelerate to 20% a year over 21 years. But that means on average, it grows about 29% a year, ARR. And that 29% a year for 21 years gets you to 13 million a coin. And so what do I expect to happen? Well, I expect lots of high net worth individuals that previously thought it's too risky or it's too scary. They see it legitimized by BlackRock. Now, BlackRock is giving guidance that you could have 2% of your portfolio in Bitcoin. And they're seeing the ETFs like IBIT, and they're noticing that these are the most successful ETFs in the history of the world. And BlackRock has got the most successful ETF ever launched. And now they're seeing the world's largest money manager, BlackRock, with more than $11 trillion of money managed. They're seeing them publish scholarly, thoughtful, responsible white papers on portfolio allocation. And instead of the 60-40 model with 60% equity and 40% bonds, now you've got 2% that they're saying you might want to put into a crypto asset like Bitcoin. So I think that you've got that group of people that are finding it. I also think you've got institutional investors that are moving into Bitcoin more frequently now. A lot of them are big investors in MicroStrategy. A lot of them trade MicroStrategy options. And they have MicroStrategy has been the most successful stock in the S&P index. We're not in the S&P, but we're more successful than all 500 S&P companies for the past 4 years. I think this year too. So we're getting the attention of mainstream investors, and that's bringing a set of new investors to the asset class, because when they buy our stock, we buy Bitcoin with it.
Actually, just last week, MicroStrategy bought another $1.1 billion worth of Bitcoin. Right now, they're holding over 450,000 Bitcoin in total. That's over $47 billion in Bitcoin. This one company alone owns about 2% of the total Bitcoin supply of 21 million, which is just ridiculous. And like Michael Saylor mentioned a while back, with the introduction of Bitcoin ETFs, more companies and wealthy individuals are jumping in and buying Bitcoin. So honestly, we can only expect Bitcoin to keep going up from here.
I think the third driver is a bunch of Bitcoin standard companies. A lot of companies are recapitalizing their balance sheets on Bitcoin. MicroStrategy was the first, but Mara has done it, M-A-R-A, and Riot just announced they're doing it, R-I-O-T. And the most successful company in the Japanese stock market this year is Metaplanet, and they just did it. And Similar Scientific just did it, and they tripled their stock in very short order. So you've got like a half dozen companies that are recapitalizing to the Bitcoin standard. But you've got 60 companies that have Bitcoin, and there's a lot of companies that are getting more heavily involved. I think recently Hut 8 announced, Hut, H-U-T, and then Rumble, R-U-M. And so a bunch of public companies that are kind of, they're innovators, and they've got a fairly open mind, and they're flexible. And the really important thing about that, Tom, is when a public company adopts Bitcoin, they start sweeping their cash flows into it. But then after that, they may start issuing equity. And then after that, they can borrow money. So Riot just this week issued a $500 million convertible bond, and then they bought Bitcoin with it. And
Is
Mara,
this Riot Games?
no, Riot Bitcoin mining,
Got it.
R-I-O-T, Riot. And so Mara did the same thing. They did a $1 billion convertible bond deal and they bought Bitcoin. And then they did another $850 million bond deal 2 weeks later. And MicroStrategy, when we announced we were going to pursue a Bitcoin treasury company model, we announced that October 30th of just this year. And we've raised, something in the range of $15 billion in the last 6 weeks. And so you're talking about large sums of money that are flowing. I mean, much larger sums. It took us 30 years to accumulate $500 million in order to buy Bitcoin in 2020. It took us 4 years to accumulate $10 billion. And we bought Bitcoin over the next 4 years. But then it took us like 4 weeks or 5 weeks to accumulate the next 15 billion. So you would check off that box, which is company adoption.
I just want to pause the video here real quick. If you're enjoying this video, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. It really helps out the channel a lot.
Then after that, you've got like institutional adoption, the endowments and the pension funds. There's now pension funds that are starting to allocate to Bitcoin, and there'll be big university endowments and 501c3s and insurance companies. And so that's another driver. And then you've got nation states. And of course, the news of the week is the United States Strategic Bitcoin Reserve. And the US already has about 1% of the Bitcoin. If they don't sell it, that's a big deal. And Donald Trump said, never sell your Bitcoin. And then he was elected president. But now you have Senator Cynthia Lummis advocating for a US Strategic Bitcoin Reserve. You have a very supportive cabinet, lots of cabinet members that have been pro-Bitcoin. And then Senator Lummis just posted a tweet just a few hours ago, having met with the incoming Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent, saying that she looks forward to working with him on this. And presumably that means that he is also supportive. And we know that the Trump White House and Trump is supportive. He was asked on the New York Stock Exchange floor, I think yesterday, by Jim Cramer about it. Will you do something like this? And he said, I think so. I think we need to lead. So I think that that's also positive. So let's just say there's a lot of different entities in the world with capital. I mean, who doesn't want to keep their money? Who doesn't want more money, right? Everybody wants to either keep their money or they could use more money. And so Bitcoin is digital money.
I found this really interesting website that shows which countries hold Bitcoin. And the stats are pretty fascinating. If we can see right here, the US is leading the pack with over 200,000 Bitcoin. But the most surprising thing here is that China is close behind with just under 200,000 Bitcoin, even though they've banned Bitcoin mining and transactions. And in third, we've got the UK holding just over 60,000 Bitcoin. Honestly, I think it's safe to say that these countries and probably others will continue building their Bitcoin reserves in the coming years. It's going to be really interesting to watch how this plays out over time.
It's the greatest digital monetary network in the world, but maybe it's the first example of what I call digital capital. It's money, just so I can help people not be confused. Money is a generic term, but it decomposes in the modern world into two elements, currency and capital. Currency is the dollar and the peso and the euro. That is the medium of exchange asset. It is designated legal tender. That means you can swap it without paying a tax bill on it. And it means it's liquid and fungible, and probably it's good for paying taxes, and everybody prices things in it. That's not going to change. The world reserve currency is the dollar. The dollar's been the world reserve currency since just after World War I. And in different forms, the dollar is getting stronger, not weaker. But there's another aspect of money. It's store of value. If I had a liquid fungible asset that was a store of value that I could give to my children's children, well, nobody thinks that's the dollar, and nobody in the U.S. thinks it's the dollar. Rich people in the U.S. don't have 50% of their assets invested in dollar bills. And what they do think it is in the modern world is they think it's the S&P index, like the Vanguard 500 or SPY or some index fund, or maybe they think it's real estate. And real estate's a store of value, but it's not liquid and fungible. So it's a little bit different. It's difficult to swap it out in units of $1 million every day. And so it's not quite money, but it is capital in that regard. And gold for 5,000 years was kind of capital. It was a bar of gold bullion was that long-term store of value asset that people use. Bitcoin is emerging as digital capital. And people, they're not going to use it as a medium exchange to buy a cup of coffee. But if you want to buy something to give to your granddaughter that she can't mess up, even though she's 3 years old, and you don't want to worry about it every day, and you don't want to trade it, and you don't want to worry about antitrust and whether or not there'll be rent control on the building or renting it out. You just buy her one Bitcoin and you put it in cold storage, and then 60 years from now, she'll be rich because the one Bitcoin will probably be worth 50 million or $100 million, right? And so that what's going on right now is the emergence of Bitcoin as a digital capital network for the world. And the thing driving it from 100,000 to 13 million over the next 21 years is the adoption of it as a capital asset by people that have the wealth, have the capital.
If you don't believe Bitcoin is the new gold or digital gold, I'd honestly love to know why. There will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin, just like gold has a limited supply. And like gold, Bitcoin is a store of value that isn't controlled by any government since it's a blockchain. If we check right now, gold's market cap is sitting around $18 trillion, while Bitcoin is sitting around $2 trillion. Bitcoin is way more accessible, and with companies and wealthy individuals pouring in more money, the potential for growth is huge. Honestly, I think it's totally possible for Bitcoin to hit $1 million per coin in the future.
The inflation of the dollar supply means that your wealth is cut in half every 10 years if you hold all your wealth in cash. And it's the rule of 72, right? You divide 7% into 72. That's the half-life of the asset. So the half-life of your wealth is 10 years if you store it in cash. If someone gives you an asset you can invest in that goes up 7% a year, you're keeping up with inflation. You're not getting wealthier, but you're not getting poorer. You're just treading water, and if you're beating that hurdle rate, then you're getting a bit wealthier. So once you understand that, you can see that you can't preserve your wealth for long periods of time in a fiat currency. And the best fiat currency in the world, Tom, is the dollar. But in most other currencies, they inflate at 14% a year. And that means the half-life of your wealth is 5 years. But in a weak currency, like in Turkey or Syria or Iraq or Venezuela or Argentina, it used to be for 20 years, the inflation rate looks more like 28% a year or 30% a year. And we take example, the peso. The peso went from 1 peso to the dollar to 1,000 pesos to the dollar over 20 years.
Jesus.
Okay, so in America, you got to keep in mind, you're an American. You live in the greatest country of the last 100 years. America won every war, right? We were the winner of World War I. We got richer. We were the winner of World War II. We never lost the war. We were the winners of the century. Our currency lost 99.9% of its economic power over the 100 years. But if you went to Nigeria or like Germany, the currency crashed like 2 or 3 times, right? In Japan, the currency crashed, In Russia, it crashed last time the Russian currency crashed in 98. The Brazilian currency crashed completely 25 years ago. The Argentine currency crashed about 4 times in 100 years. So if you're an Argentinian and you're 30 years old, you already know what it's like to have hyperinflation because you lived the entire cycle. It's just Americans don't. And so if you're taking advice from an American business person like Warren Buffett or Charlie Munger, well, I mean, they didn't live through the Weimar Republic. They didn't live through the collapse of the current. By the way, the currency collapsed in Venezuela. It collapsed in Argentina. It collapsed in Brazil. It collapsed in Cuba. It collapsed in Russia. It collapsed in every single country in Africa. You see? And so foreigners actually get it a bit better, right? It's like the bank's going to take your money. The currency's going to zero. The government's going to promise you it'll be okay and tell you to put your money in the bank. Then they're going to inflate the currency, freeze your bank account, crash the currency, and then tell you it's worthless. That's what happened in Cyprus not too long ago, if you want to go and Google that. And so the real promise of Bitcoin is very simple. It's a bank in cyberspace that won't steal your money. And it's an asset that you can store your life savings in that nobody can debase or corrupt. And those are 2 powerful promises for the first time in the history of the human race. No one ever gave you those 2 promises ever before now.
Michael Saylor makes a very great point here. America's inflation rate has been averaging around 5% annually over the past 5 years. And if that continues, the US dollar will lose half of its value in just 10 years. Even if Bitcoin's return drops from 60% to 20%, you'd still be outpacing inflation by 4 times and beating the S&P 500 by 2 times. It's not too late to invest in Bitcoin, and honestly, I think now is the perfect time to buy. Anyways, if you've enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe, and also let me know your stance on Bitcoin and where do you think it's headed in the future. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments.